Hi guys and welcome back. So in today's video I'm going to be sharing with you my honest review of The Montessori Baby by Simone Davies and Junnifa Uzodike. If you don't know who I am, then my name is Abigail. I have a son called Samuel who is 2.5 years old and a baby boy called Noah who is only 3 months old. And if you want to check out my Montessori at home playlist, I have a whole bunch of videos around the Montessori topic for some more inspiration and showing how we implement Montessori in our lives and in our home. And without further ado, let's get into my review of The Montessori Baby. Starting off with the layout and how the whole book is set up and laid out. It's laid out in short paragraphs interspersed with illustrations that are very simple and clear, and also with very beautiful photographs, and this really breaks up the whole layout of the book very nicely. It also includes quotes from different people associated with the Montessori world, including Maria Montessori herself and other people that have inspirational quotes that are in line with Montessori principles. There is also good use of tables to really emphasize certain points and expand upon other points, to give additional information in some areas and to just provide a different way of reading the text. And I find this in actual books to be very, very important and very interesting to read. And so I really like the way the book is set up. At the end of each chapter there is key points or questions for reflection, and it's kind of a recap of the chapter and things to be thinking about as you look at and observe your own child and things that to implement. So it's kind of like a summary as well as thoughts for further reflection or questions to ask yourself to do with your child based on the information you've just been given. I'm going to briefly go over the content of the book now. And so the content really covers everything that you can think of, right from pregnancy to the very first year of your baby. And so it really covers loads of things from breastfeeding to sleeping to the Montessori approach to all of these different aspects of your baby's first year of life. It really does cover a lot and can be used in place of a lot of different books, I think. The first 2 chapters are just general introductions to Montessori and how that applies to Montessori for babies. I will say that if you're familiar with Montessori and you know a lot of the concepts, then this is not going to be new information. This is just a recap and a reiteration of Montessori. If you are new to Montessori, then this is very essential information and very important to read, because it gives you an overall background on what you're thinking about when you go into Montessori with your baby, and so it is very essential. Chapter 3 talks about how to apply the principles of Montessori in pregnancy, and I find this chapter quite interesting because I never thought about Montessori being something that you could apply during pregnancy, but this book definitely says you can apply the concepts of Montessori in pregnancy, and it goes through a variety of different ways that you can do this. I will say that these concepts are not specifically Montessori in my opinion. There's a lot of overlap with different styles of pregnancy and birthing. For example, hypnobirthing, I would say there's got a massive overlap with hypnobirthing, and if you really wanted to go in more detail you could just get a hypnobirthing book and look into it. This is more of like an introduction in some of the Montessori principles, and then you could build on that by buying yourself another book, say on hypnobirthing, and that would go into it in more depth. In chapter 4, I feel like you really start to get into the meat of the book and really get to the meat of what I want to get into. Sometimes I try to skip over introductions and bits that I've already read before. I really want to get to the meat, and I feel like in chapter 4 that's where the real meat of the book starts for me personally. I really like the room by room setup. It explains how to set up your house in a Montessori way, room by room. I found this very helpful, and I found the illustrations associated with this also helpful. Because I'm the type of person that likes just to be told sometimes this is how you should set it up, and here is an example, and you can almost copy the example if you like. So if you're like that as well, there's definitely some very hard concrete examples here to show you exactly how to do it, and you could almost just replicate this within your own home. Chapter 5 starts to talk about how to act with your baby, how to handle your baby, how to speak with your baby, everything to do with you and your baby and the connection and the relationship that you're building. And I do think this will be surprising to some people, just how much of the book talks about that aspect of Montessori. It's not talking so much about the activities in a lot of the book, it's talking about the connection, how you're building that connection with your baby, and how your baby's relationship with yourself and with the environment and the outside world. And I think this is surprising because sometimes Montessori is presented as wooden toys and having this lovely setup in your home, and really Montessori at its core is not about that at all, and you can actually do Montessori with very few physical objects, with very little expense, and that can be very surprising to people who are encountering Montessori for the first time, I think. And so this is definitely where the part of the book that goes into that starts. And then chapter 6 gets into the activities, which is the part that interests a lot of people, and what activities can I put out for my child. But I do think it's important that the book starts off with the overall Montessori approach and the much more of the mental aspect of it, and thinking about how you're going to implement it rather than the physical activities. But if you're into the activities, then chapter 6 is where it's at, as it goes through in a lot of detail all the activities that you can present to your baby in the first year of life. Then chapter 7 is about putting it into practice, taking everything that you've learned in the start of the book, all the activities, all the physical things, all the mental preparation, etc., and putting it into practice in the daily rituals and routines of life. And it talks about potty training, it talks about feeding, sleeping, it talks about everything. It covers everything in a little bit of detail in these chapters. I personally think that if you're wanting to specifically explore something like potty training, then you definitely need to get another book that goes into that specific aspect of something in much more detail. But this book is very good at doing a very basic introduction to how Montessori would view it, and then you can go on and buy a potty training book that also aligns with that view. So for example, they very much emphasise not starting potty training until your child is ready, until they're showing signs of ready, because you need to always follow the child. And so you could then go and research potty training books which align with that view. Chapter 8 is about preparation of the adult and preparing yourself for your baby and being the best person or parent that you can be to your child, and how to do that in a Montessori way. And then chapter 9 talks about working with others, with family members, with other people around you, and how to get them to understand your ideas on Montessori, and just how to collaborate and work with other people in the baby's life. That's the overall content of the book, and now I'm just going to go through some of the things that I liked about the book, some of the things that I didn't like about the book, and just kind of expand upon them a bit. So there are lots of explanations of your baby's developmental stages in this book. There's very, very big sections of text talking all about your baby's developmental stages, what they're thinking and feeling potentially at this stage, and the activities that you need to be putting in their way that are developmentally appropriate. And if you're really interested in everything that's going on in your baby's brain, then you'll really love this. If you're not so interested in that and kind of want to jump to what you need to do, then you maybe need to skip large sections of the text. But I will say that it probably is important to understand the reason behind why you're putting certain activities in your baby's way. And so these parts of the text are important. You might just only read them once and then not read them again, because they are quite large sections of the text and they're quite detailed. The book does get a little bit repetitive. Partly I think this is because I've read a lot about Montessori before, and so I know some of the concepts, but I do think the book repeats itself in certain places. In the introduction, the first few chapters, it mentions a few things, and then it mentions them again later in the book, and it expands upon them quite a lot in a way that I don't think is always necessary. For example, it goes into really great depth about how to talk to your baby, and I feel like you could do that in a much smaller section. I feel like you didn't need quite as much explanation around it, but it is still very useful, especially if you're new to Montessori, and so I see why they put it in there. Montessori as represented in this book definitely overlaps a lot with respectful parenting, gentle parenting, attachment parenting. All of these types of parenting kind of come under the same umbrella in many ways, and a lot of the concepts are overlapping. So if you already know about one of these styles of parenting, then you'll definitely have overlaps in what Montessori is talking about, which can be very handy because you can then just build upon what you're already interested in and how you want to represent your world to your baby. And so it's good to have overlaps, I think, and it shows that everyone's kind of thinking in the same way in many ways, and that you can build upon what you're already using within your home. For me personally, the highlights of the book are actually the appendices, which is where I personally find the most value and the parts of the book that I return to the most. So the first part of the appendices talks about real life stories. So basically you have pictures and photos of people's real life homes and Montessori homes and how they look in real life. And it also talks about how people specifically implement Montessori, which I find it to be very helpful. And then it also talks about activities by age, and it just lists them all by age. And then you've also got milestones by age, so that big whole section where it talks about your baby's development is kind of condensed down into table format right at the end. And I find this whole section to be very helpful because this is the section you're going to go back to. Once you've read the whole book from beginning to end, the appendices is the parts you're going to go back to and review when your baby gets to a certain developmental milestone. So when your baby hits 6 months, you're going to look at that part of the book and see what's developing in their brain at the moment and what activities can I use to support that. And the appendices are definitely the best part of the book for that. I also really like that the book is inclusive of family preferences, so it's not just this is what you must do, this is the Montessori way, nothing else can be even slightly called Montessori, which I sometimes feel like can come across sometimes in Montessori content. This is quite nice in that it's a bit more flexible, and it says, for example, if you don't want to use the Montessori floor bed, this is what you can do instead. That is still a Montessori approach. And I personally really like that because my family follows Montessori loosely, so we follow some aspects of it and other aspects we don't like as much. And this gives you kind of alternatives that can be still classed as Montessori, but are not specifically using the exact thing that they're talking about. For example, the toppuccino or the floor bed or the little seat they have at the floor instead of a high chair. All of these different things, they're presented as Montessori, and then alternatives are given, which I found it to be a really helpful aspect of the book. This is definitely a great book if you are new to Montessori and don't really know much about it. I also think it is good if you already know about Montessori and you really want a bunch of practical ideas on how to implement these things in the first year of your baby's life. I know quite a bit about Montessori, I've read quite a lot about it, but I still found this book really useful for practical activities and things that I could do with my baby in the first year of life, and also some new ideas that I hadn't thought about or that I needed refreshed on, and I found that very helpful. But I do feel like you can skip a bunch of the book if you have read the Montessori Toddler. It's a very similar format. Some of the content is repeated in a slightly different way, and so you potentially could skip this book if you're very good at taking the idea of Montessori and implementing it to your child's developmental stage. But if you want something that's a little bit more concrete and this is what you do at this stage, then this is definitely a good book for you. Just a little note here at the end about the format and what format to get it in. I would personally recommend getting this book in paperback because it's the kind of book that's quite nice to flip through, and the illustrations come out really nicely in colour, and the photographs. It's just a really nice book to have and to feel, and I think that's more important with factual books than it is with fiction. But you can also get it in Kindle. That's what I personally have it in, but like I said, I personally think paperback is the best way to go if you can get hold of a copy in paperback. And I will link it down below in the description box if you're interested in picking it up. And I'll see you very soon in my next one. Bye guys.